Quando de, quando de, quando dane. Quando de, quando de, quando de, quando dane. Quando de, hey, quando de, quando de, quando dane. Quando de, quando de, quando de, quando dane. Quando de, quando de, quando de, quando dane. Quando de, hey, quando de, quando de, quando dane. Quando de, quando de, quando dane. Quando de, quando de, quando dane. Quando de, hey, quando de, quando de, quando dane. Quando de, quando dane. Going to do a newer song written by Jesse Bruchak. We refer to this as Poe. Poe, obe, odali, odze, wedukani, ona, ne, kondo, ona, Azaguida, odze, ketsenua, Poe, obe, odali, Odze, weduka, ni ona, one, gando, ona, azeguido, odze, ketsenua, Poe, obe, odale, Poe, obe, odale, Odze, weduka, ni ona, one, gondo, ona, azeguido, Odze, ketsenua, Poe, obe, odale, Odze, weduka, ni ona, one, gando, ona, azeguido, Odze, ketsenua, skon. This next song I wrote a long time ago. Somebody handed me some lyrics, and I realized at that point in time that I was just a conduit for what's going on around me. The lyrics were handed to me, and within seconds, I was singing a melody. This is the Botany Woodsy. Some of you will hear. There's a there's the drum group singing this one right now. So Eastern Medicine Singers, I believe they're still using this as a warm up. This is the Botany Woodsy. The Botany Woodsy, okay, kesu. The Botany Woodsy, no peko sukwana. Vadne wotse metagwash kesuku katane to batne hey yaho Vadne wotse Okay, kesu. Bane wate no pe kosu kwana. Bane wate metakwas kesuku. Katane to bane, katane to bane. Hey, 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 yo. Gotta check the communication. Okay. I got time for another one. I want to jump on to a newer song. This is the song is called Moonhawk. It was lyrics written by George Michaud, who's been singing with me with the Black Hawk Singers. Song was inspired by some artwork from someone for our last album with Black Hawk Singers. This is Moonhawk. Pau Guas Siamo. Pau Guas Siamo. Nane Babu So. Linton Spirit, it's la cause. Tami, Managwan, Tami, Managwan, oh, Tipen, na weep me God. Hello, me, we, how do I say? Moonhawk, the night traveler, he sings with the evening star. Where is the rainbow? Where's the rainbow? As they dance together in how was si amor nane pa so lento spirit it's la cause time na bon time na bon oh depend on we make out hello me we pound I say Well, I can't hear the audience right now, but I think my time up is done for the time being. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in a little while. I think we're going over to David now, right?
David seems to have dropped out for a minute, so I think we'll move right to Chief Don Stevens speaking.
You there?
Kwei, greetings everyone. Oli Oni for allowing me to speak to you today. I'm hoping everybody can hear me fine. So basically I'd like to tell you a little bit about who we are. We were known as Alnoba human beings, but within the Abenaki community, there are 4 tribes in Vermont that are recognized by the state of Vermont. There is the Missisquoi, which most people know. They're from the Swan area. They're place of the Flint. They're up in Franklin, Grand Isle, Alberg areas. And I know my video, I'm not sure how the video, if you're seeing me on the video, it's fine. But anyway, the Missisquoi, like I said, in the Swanton Alberg area. And then there's Nulhegan. We mean, we're the place of the wooden fish traps. So we're the Nulhegan Band of the Coosac. We're one of the largest tribes in the state of Vermont. We are primarily in the Northeast Kingdom around Lake Memphremagog. Our territory goes over into pretty close to Moosehead Lake in Maine, down through Vermont to about Thetford, Barnett area, over across to Chittenden County, down into about Otter Creek. Otter Creek's kind of shared by all the tribes. Then you have the Coassuck of the Coas Meadows, who are really in the Newberry Haverhill area. And then you have El New, which is down in the 3 bottom counties, Wyndham, Bennington, and all the way up into the Thetford. So those are about the 4 tribes that are in Vermont that have been recognized. There's also another tribe that is unrecognized that lives in the Thetford area. And there's a couple in New Hampshire that are unrecognized. And there are 2 recognized in Canada, Woolanak and also Odanak. So we are the Western Abenaki people, and the Penobscots are the Eastern Abenaki people. So that's pretty much the area. The territories, like I said, goes all the way up. If you're counting Odanak and Woolanak, it's all the way up to the St. Lawrence, all the way up where it meets the Maliseets and the Willisticooks. And then it comes down over to, like I said, Moosehead Lake in Maine, down through New Hampshire, down into northern Massachusetts, about where Turner Falls is. So that's quite an area. We are part of 2 confederacies, the Wabanaki Confederacy, which is the people who allied with the French, and they fought not necessarily on the front lines, but they were allied with the French. They were in the French territory, which was considered New France at the time. And then you had the 7 Nations of Canada, which we're also a part of, which were the people directly involved with the conflict during the time of the French and Indian Wars. So to let people know, we're kind of, water is really important to us. Water is really our highways. In the wintertime, we would move to the woods. That's why we're known as people of the pine, the Coosac people of the pine. So we would hunt big game during the wintertime and live in the woods. And then in the summer, we would migrate to the floodplains after the floods had gone through, so we could plant our crops and live on the waterfowl and the fish. That would allow the bigger game to replenish. So that was our highway. I mean, the rivers were our highway. You know, we would travel up and down the highways, visiting relatives, doing trading, you know, and using the water to irrigate our fields. So, you know, we had quite a a network. And most people, if you know about Abenaki people, they were family bands. So each band would come together like in a rendezvous style, and then the elders of those families would come together and talk and do like a tribal council, modern day tribal council, and decide where do you live, on what part of the river your family might live on. You know, what if there was disputes, if
So
there
right from
were other things that needed to be taken care of. And while those things were happening, people would learn how to do quill work or basket work, while others might be involved in healing or doing ceremonies. So all of those things, people would come together as family bands, and those families would then, you know, go along the riverbanks, so that way all the resources didn't get used up. So part of that makeup is the way we still practice today. You know, Nulhegan still goes by families coming together and electing me, electing me chief. I was elected in 2010 to help represent the people, and but I don't really have a say in anything. So usually I can guide people, but it's really run by the council, the tribal council, and then the council of elders, who are the people who've gone through ceremony and oversee things to make sure that we're following our language, our culture, and our traditions. But part of that whole Wabanaki Confederacy and the and the Seven Nations of Canada issue during the French and Indian Wars, of course, we were being invaded. So we went up and had a big council fire up. It was up in Ganawage. I believe it was Ganawage. And people got together, and we asked the French to come down and help us. So when the Champlain decided to come down the Rushlow River into Lake Champlain to kind of see to see what was going on, he left some of his troops because they didn't run into enemies. So there was only a few of them that came down with Champlain down the Rushlow River. And then we met the Iroquois down around Crown Point, and which started the French and Indian Wars. But we didn't fight that day, like most traditions. You know, war is a nasty business for people. You know, you can't feed your family if you're fighting. So we set aside the war for that day, came back the next day, and then some of the Iroquois chiefs were killed, and which started the kind of the French and Indian Wars, because people wanted control of the lake, right? Whoever controlled the lake and the waterways controlled the fur trade. So that's when the British jumped in. So there was like that's why water is so important. And Mel will talk to you later about women's ceremonies, but they're the keeper of the water. They're the keeper of our water and our life, the essence of life, because water is the essence of life. It keeps the glue. It's kind of like the glue of the web of life. You know, everything is bonded to water. Like water that flows inside of me right now has flowed through animals, plants, ancestors. It's a finite amount. So obviously it evaporates to the sky. It falls back down. We drink it. It evaporates from us, goes to the sky, falls back down, and might go through a plant or animal. So that's really the glue that holds everything together, and that's what keeps. We can't survive without water, and it holds the memories of our people, and the water and clean water is so important. And speaking of part of the clean water is, you know, we're doing a lot here in Vermont to try to work with. There's a Rushlow River study to help to see what the impact of the water is. There's the cleanup of Lake Champlain through the Sea Grant program. So the Abenaki people are really involved with trying to keep our water sources pure for our kids and for our grandkids. So as part of the, I've been talking really about the western side of the state, but also on the eastern side, where the Connecticut is, where the river stories that is, you know, that Nolambika is bringing you, there's a lot of important sites on that area too. I don't know if anybody's heard of Brunswick Springs, but it's known as one of the 8 wonders of the world. And that's up in Nulhegan territory. And it's a beautiful place if you ever get a chance to go up there. There's 7 pools of healing waters that flow from springs into the Connecticut River. And part of the legend of that place is that there was a soldier that was wounded, and he was going to die, and they brought him towards the springs, knowing that was a sacred site for Native people, and it healed people. So they brought him to these springs, and he drank the water and bathed in it down near the Connecticut where the springs came in, and he was healed. And he was so impressed with that healing water that came out of our mother, the earth, that he wanted to have an interest in this place. So the legend goes that our ancestors, our Native ancestors, said it's okay if you use the water because it's given by the Creator and through Mother Earth. It's like her breast milk, right? I mean, water is like her breast milk to us. Is that as long as we didn't try to make a profit off from the water itself, that we would be okay and we could use it because it's not ours to sell, right? So the person agreed to it, and our native ancestor said, okay, you can use it, and use part of the spring. And eventually, long story short, is that people would go there for the healing, and then they started to build hotels on this place, and then that was still okay. People would come and they would bathe in the water and they would be healed. And then things were going along, and then they decided to put a bottling plant there to bottle the water and sell the water. Well, as soon as they did that, the hotel burned down, and then they rebuilt it. It burned down again, and then they did it a third time, and it burned down. And to us, it's the spirit of the woods. Some people call them Yeti. Some people call them Bigfoot. We call them Big Hairy Man, who watches over the forest and the lands. That he was protecting that place and doing what our ancestors had said. That if you sell the land or sell the water, then it's not yours to sell. So then bad things will come to you. And when those things started happening, they call it the curse of Brunswick Springs, is that after the third time the hotel burnt, the brothers owned it. One of the brothers died. So the other brother was so freaked out, he ended up giving it back to the Native people. So it's now in control of Native hands, and we protect it and watch over it. And people can still go there today and drink the water and walk on the land. So that's a really important site for us, and that's way up in the Northeast Kingdom. So, and working our way back down, there's another really important place for us is the Coos Meadows. That was one of the first sites of the mission de Loops, which is back in the 1700s. That was the first mission in Vermont. The Jesuits built it on the Coos Meadows because there was a big Indian village there, a big Abenaki village between Newberry, Haverhill, that whole stretch right there. There was acres and acres of corn in that location. That was a huge farming area for us where we raised our crops. And the great thing is that the people, the Coassuck of the Coos Meadows still grow the corn today. And so it links the past to the present, and we grow it as well. Many of our tribes grow the corn. It was given to us by the Creator. No, well, actually, the Creator allowed the Corn Mother to provide it for us. If you don't know much about the Corn Mother story, it's basically a quick overview of that. Is that corn and tobacco came to us because there was a mother that couldn't feed her children, and her children were crying, and she went to the Creator and said, could you please give me a way to feed my children. And he said, well, what do you have to give? And she didn't really have anything to give. So she went back home and, heard her children crying more and more. So she just couldn't do it anymore. And she went to the Creator and said, Creator, uh, I I love my children so much that I'll give my life so that way they may live. And the Creator said, well, you need to speak with your husband because um, you guys came into this world together and are partners, and he has to agree to it too. So she went back to her husband and said, husband, I want to feed our children. So I have to give myself in order for our children to be able to eat. And he was, of course, like any husband, like, what, I really don't want to lose you. And she said, you won't lose me. I'll just transform. Like in our culture, we don't really die. Our physical body may go away, but we transition to the spirit world. So there's really not a death. There's just a physical loss. So anyway, he agreed to it. So she gave her life, and he carried her up to a mound and into a field and buried her. And while this was happening, her two other sisters that lived in other villages came to take care of her children. And the one that had passed, the mother was kind of a tall, lanky woman, and and then she was buried in the mound, and then her husband wept over her and soaked the mound. And then about the fourth day, the children and the sisters came up to get the husband and brought them down so he could at least get some rest. And then on the seventh day, he went back up and he looked at the mound and he said he saw two things kind of growing from it, corn and tobacco. And he didn't know what those things were at the time. But he was astonished that something was growing out of there, and he was puzzled. And he heard his wife's voice say, husband, I did not die. I'm still here, but we're fulfilling the prophecy of that I gave myself so that way my children can live. So as this corn grows, you'll see my hair on my ears, and and when it turns black, it means it's ready to eat. And then because I never want a child of mine to ever give their life for prayer again, this is tobacco to offer. So we have something to give in order to get something in return. And after that happened, there was a few years that went by, and the other sister passed away. She was kind of a loving sister, and she wanted to be buried with her other sister. And she kind of, as she was buried where her sister was, she kind of grew, and she always loved to hug. So she became the beans who grew up her sister's stock, which was the corn. And then later on, when her last sister, who was kind of a protector of the family, when she passed, she said she wanted to be buried with her sisters because the rodents kept trying to eat her sister. So she turned into squash, which is really picky, and surrounded her sisters. And that's how the three sisters came to be in the Three Sister Gardens. And the reason why I'm telling you this, why it's so important, is because all this has to do with water. It has to do with growing on our floodplains. Water and our culture and our stories are integral to each other. They're really important. Our ceremonies, everything surrounds water and life and our food systems. And that's why I'm kind of telling you these kind of stories, because you can't have one without the other, right? I mean, they're all intermixed. So with these stories, that's why we would go and we would plant these things, and it would grow, and we would use those as a trading thing, to be able to trade and to be able to eat, and we would store these things so that way we had things to eat over the winter, and we still do those things today. And we fish to use that bone meal for the gardens. And so anyway, that was such an important part of our lives at the Coos Meadows. That's why the Jesuits put up a mission there, and they tried to Christianize us. They did Christianize a lot of us. I mean, we kind of walk in two worlds, and that's how you could tell the difference between the 7 Nations of Canada people and the 6 Nations of the Iroquois. I mean, the 7 Nations Iroquois people and us, we were Christianized, where the British didn't decide to do that to their subjects, as they said. But for the French side, that was very integral in what they did was to Christianize people. And I mention that because people always think Odanak was the first thing that was there. Odanak was not the first place that had a mission. It was the Coos Meadows. Then there was another mission at Missisquoi. People have heard of Greylock's War. It was a refugee place where a lot of people came from the South from different wars on the Deerfield raids, and all of the Native people moved up Lake Champlain and moved up into Missisquoi. So that was another mission. So those were the 2 big missions in Vermont. And then Odanak was really founded later on, after much later into the they were allied with the French, and that's when that was their area up near up on the St. Lawrence. So I always mention that because we are a distinct. We are the same people, but we have distinct areas, and we never left our homeland. We've always been here, even though we had to not always be out in view. So I just need to mention that, and we still are part of those confederacies today. We actually had a Abenaki Confederacy meeting in 2015. The first one in I don't know, 100 years maybe here in Vermont. And we had that on Lake Champlain at Shelburne Farms. That's where Adziozo is. Adziozo is the creator of the lake. And there's a whole story behind that as well, and how we lived on near the La Platte, and, it was a lookout on Shelburne Farms, and Adziozo is the creator of the lake, and he's the one who created Champ, and there's other stories around there. So we can go in many directions, but I know that part of what I'm trying to give you in this short amount of time is the makeup of our people, how we live, who we're associated with, the territories that we use, and that we still do these things today. It's not something that happened years ago or something in history books. We are a living culture with living histories, and we continue to thrive. We continue to meet as families. We continue to still gather on the riverbanks. If any of you are interested, Fiddleheads will be coming up shortly. To gather around the riverbanks, the leaks. We gather our medicines. We still use water, and really emphasize water. And just to emphasize how much water, and this will go in probably to Mel, what she might talk about a little bit, is in a circle of life, we have 7 directions. And the first direction is when we were conceived. And when we were conceived, our father presented many choices to our mother, right? The mother is the carrier of life. She chose a little person to be her son or daughter, and sometimes maybe 2, right? Melly has a baby. She can tell you that the father presented these things to the mother, and the mother decided who she chose. And then that was the first blessing. And then she took a piece of her heart and put it into the baby's chest, so the child will always remember the love and compassion of the mother and all of the mothers that came before. Her mother, her grandmother, her great-grandmother, Mother Earth, all of the women are encompassed in this water that is surrounding the baby when they're living inside their mother in the womb for 9 months, living in this water. And that heart and that water and that soul stamps all of that information onto the child about the whole history of our lives and our life cycle. That was the second blessing. The third blessing is the first time our children are baptized is when their water breaks and it baptizes us for the first time into the world. It wasn't a priest. It wasn't something. The first time we were baptized is by the mother's water breaking over us. And at that point we could live or die, right? Because we're coming out. And the last fourth blessing is when the four winds or the Holy Spirit touches our lips and blows life into your lips, and the last thing that touches when you die. So anyway, I'm going to probably wrap it up there and turn it back to Dave, because I know Dave had some announcements. So thank you, Dave.
Good evening. Can you hear me, or should I continue to, I guess, all right. Are we all set? Good evening, everybody. I'm David Brule of the Nolambika Project, and I'm here to step in between Chief Don Stevens of the Nulhegan Abenaki and Brian Blanchette, who will be doing another couple of songs, some that he has written and some that are traditional. I'm coming along with a few announcements to help people understand how they can participate. So it's fairly important for you to pay attention to this part. So this meeting and this event is being recorded, and your audience microphones and video are off. So to ask questions during the question and answer portion of this evening, you will use the question and the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And so when you have a question to ask either Dawn, Chief Dawn, or Melody, you will type your question and direct your question to either Dawn or Melody, so that we can be sure when the performers are ready to take your questions, all right? Now, the Nolambika Project, I hope you're familiar with. If not, you can find out a lot of information about our organization. We chose to organize these River Stories events to provide a kind of a counterbalance to the 1620-2020 commemoration plans that are going to be taking place in Plymouth, celebrating the arrival of the Pilgrims in 1620. We need to remind the citizens of New England and of the Northeast, remind us all of the impacts of that arrival and the ensuing oppression, dispossession, and colonization, and resurgence of Indigenous peoples in this part of the Northeast. The decolonizing process is already and continuing to be ongoing. We can do this series of events. We have 12 events planned. It remains to be seen whether we'll be able to meet all again in person. Our next event is scheduled for May 19th, which is May 16th, which is the day of remembrance of the victims of the massacre that occurred during King Philip's War at the Falls of Peskiomska. You'll have to check our website to see whether we'll do some kind of a presentation on line again, or whether it'll be in person out there at the Discovery Center in Turner's Falls. We can do these 12 events because we have sponsors. People have contributed over the years, or excuse me, over the months, and actually we've been planning this for 2 years. So I want to thank a certain number of organizations. The Mascoma Bank on both sides of the Connecticut River up there in New Hampshire and Vermont is a major sponsor, as is the Babson Fund of the Peace Development Fund, and the Great River Hydro, and Brattleboro Cooperative. They contributed and really made a lot of this possible for us. We also have other sponsors who are really instrumental in getting us organized for the presentation in March that didn't happen, but we do need to acknowledge their efforts. That would be Carrie Brennan of the Thetford Academy, and Colin Colloway in the Dartmouth College Native American Studies program. All of these people and organizations have been really helpful. The Connecticut River Conservancy, that is overseeing water protection from the headwaters to the mouth of the river, incredibly important partners with this. The Strolling of the Heifers of the River Garden Gallery in Brattleboro were a main sponsor for us had this been taking place up in Brattleboro. Jack Elliott of the Lime Inn in New Hampshire and John Potter of the Brattleboro Latches Hotel are also people and organizations that were really terribly important in helping us put together this long series of events. The Nolambika Project always makes it a point when we have events to make a statement about acknowledging whose land we are really on. So I'd like you to hear this acknowledgement. We always need to acknowledge the fact that we are occupying and benefiting from indigenous land that was taken, seized, or stolen under illegal and violent circumstances. For thousands of years, this has been indigenous land, as Chief Don has pointed out. This is still the homelands of the earliest Abenaki, the Pocumtuck, the Nipmuc, and the Nahantic. These native peoples and their descendants are still living here among us. Every time we meet on the lands that are indigenous, we have to acknowledge and respect that fact. Very important for us to think about. We also have to acknowledge not only the land, but the waters of this beautiful river that links us all. Don was very eloquent in talking about the role of water in indigenous culture, indigenous lifeways. To honor the river and all the creatures that live along her banks, we must all become water protectors. If you're not already, I hope you have kept this in mind. We all have to become water protectors, river protectors. And we are fortunate today to host the Abenaki from the headwaters, and we will soon host the Nahantic, whose homelands are at the mouth of the river. We'll be very inclusive from the headwaters to the mouth, involving all the tribes in between in all of our events, those 12 events that will be happening and have happened in between April and October. These events, organized by the Nolambika Project, seek to provide a forum for these tribal representatives to remind us all how we have been and still are a part of the river system, that we must strive to protect her when she cannot do it for herself. I like to think that I have a watershed address. I'm on the Millers River, as has been my family for 5 generations. My great-grandfather came here from the Nahantic peoples and settled here on a farm on the Millers River. Its Algonquian name is the Bagwaga. So that is my address. And I hope you think about what your address is. You all live close to a river. You all live close to the shores of the Connecticut River that links all of our northeastern states from the Canadian border down to Long Island Sound. So thank you for attending. And I'm now going to turn it over to Brian Blanchette of the Nulhegan Abenaki for more song. Thank you for being here tonight with us, and looking forward to hearing from Melody. And keep in mind the question and answer session later on. Thank you all.
Ego, Igande, Queo, Queo, Quandalia, Quando de, Quandalia, Quando de, Quandalia, Quando dame dea, eo, deo ka, deo ka, deo ka, deo ka. Quandalia, Quando de, Quandalia, Quando de, Quandalia, Quando dame dea, eo, ego, igande, queo, queo, Quandalia, Quando de, Quandalia, Quando de, Quandalia, Quando dame dea, eo, deo ka, deo ka, deo ka, deo ka. Quandalia, Quando de, Quandalia, Quando de, Quandalia, Quando dame dea, eo. So I'd like to do a couple more contemporary songs with guitar, without a guitar strap. This is a song called Kwai. This is a greeting song. Some man's been sleeping on the job. In wig out gone, I'm me out on me now. What kid the queen, I'm me alone. Townie kid la umzin pongis gak. Queen Nata sip que haud zi haudali. Kangwila Townie alusa on. Keep a lip from Conniba. Hey, it's good to see you again. I haven't seen you for a while. How are things these days? In Wiggledon, na me alone mina. Oh, queda qui, na me alone. Townie queda la unzin pongis gak. Quinata sip qui haut di haudali. Kanguila tamni halusu on. Keep lip from Conimbo. Wait. This next song, you know, everybody, we were all talking about climate change and global warming before the pandemic. And I'm sure most of you have seen the pictures of satellite imagery of what a few weeks of people not commuting will do to the environment. So speaking of water, this is called Water is Rising. I've recorded the Champlain Elementary students who've sung this with me. So hopefully sometime before soon, I want to get that out to them, nice finished product with the kids singing. But anyways, acoustic version, this is Water is Rising. Water is rising. I can see the tides. Water is rising. I can hear the lights. Some change is coming. That time ahead. This next generation we've left for dead. Bossa Bogon, Nami Tome na Basabango, Ikil Bossa Bogon. Never stops living a consosi. This next generation, it's on the rise. This next generation, I hear the cry. My generation got lost in our minds. My generation is now lost to time. Bossa Bogon, na Tobina, Pasabango, Kilposa, Bogong, Nevis times it been a consul sea. Water is rising, we can see the tides. Water is rising, we can hear the line. So from that one, let's move on over to this is called White Dog. This is something inspired by a friend of mine who, first song I started writing in this project, I was inspired to write a song of Abenaki language songs, or a bit of a mix, as Jesse refers to it, in a Benglish, you know. So many of us that are studying the language, the expression is speak your language, because your ancestors are listening. So without further ado, this is White Dog. Wabase matakano indakina Hidakitan wakana ta amuskaba Galboa Sekitan kata wikiga itaskoga Martini Piton Ham in Wakabo Galboa think my time's up. My time's up. Can't see the messages.
Hello, everybody. I hope you're having a good night. I'm sorry, it looks like now well, I kind of look like an angel with all this light, so we'll just go with it. Um, and so this is Melody and Molly, and we're coming to you from Virginia. So thank you so much, Brian. And I will tell you that she was smiling in her sleep the whole time you were singing. So that must mean something awesome. So if people can't hear us, just let us know. And I am going to play off of Don because he started talking about some of the things that I wanted to mention, which is kind of a perfect segue. I had a few other things I wanted to say first, but I think we'll just start with Molly. So, and how she came to be, and it all plays into this idea of water and what it is. So for me, water is it's an essential part of our culture, and we think about it in a different way. And likewise, Indigenous people as a whole think about this as in a different way. So I think it would be valuable not just to talk about the Connecticut River, but to talk about what water means in general. Whether it's spiritually, just on my everyday life, how we pay homage to the most important thing that sustains us, right? Our link to Mother Earth and everything. So one of the things I had, and maybe I'll start with another story just because I'm hilarious and I think you should know it. So a long time ago, I went on a horseback riding lesson, and it was terrifying because I'm terrified of horses. And after a couple lessons, she said, "Do you want to learn how to like canter?" And I was like, "No, we're canoe people, we're water people. I don't do this. So we'll just let him walk." And that was my last time I was ever on a horse. So with that, we are canoe people. We are water people. We like the highways through through all of Wabanaki. So anyway. So Molly, I am an older woman, and as you know, for people who have kids, your entire life changes and your entire mindset changes, right through to when I decided that I needed to be a mom, and that was really important. And so myself and the dad tried hard for months, and we were like, okay, well, what do we do? Just keep trying. And then one month it was planting season, and I said, you know what, I'm going to do a little ceremony. And the way that I did it, I wanted to tap into creation, and I wanted to ask creation itself. And I thought, what's a straight line? And I wanted to talk to Mother Earth. You can go outside and every day just walk out your front door and say words, and creation will hear you. But I wanted to do something special so that I gave something of myself, so that maybe I could get something and have this little part of creation come out, right? And so I was hoping for a gift, and in our culture of reciprocity, I needed to give one. And so I went out with my drum, I went out with my seeds. And here's the thing, we've been working on the Seeds of Renewal project for a long time. And this was the piece that, for me, all those years, that was sort of missing. So Dawn told the story of Corn Mother, which is perfect. So the idea of her giving her life for her children, and that's where the seeds come from. And so for me, I had these seeds, and I planted them, and I put the water on them. And what I did is I prayed to all the women, all those really powerful mothers before me. I talked to my mom about what it would be like, and I talked to, all those people in my life, my grandmothers aren't alive, but I talked to grandmothers in our community, and all preparing for this. And so I went out, I brought my drum, the heartbeat of Mother Earth, and I sang, and I planted the seeds, and they were corn seeds. and I've had a direct line to Corn Mother. So, and all the many eons of that women have been having babies, I went through the line, right? I went through Corn Mother that I planted in Mother Earth, and I spoke to Mother Earth using her heartbeat, and I spoke to creation itself through all those lines of mothers. And then to the final touch is I gave water, and I put it on all of my garden, and I made sure that I paid homage to that as well. Because now I think about it in a different way. What someone told me, the best thing you could ever give to your unborn child is drinking a lot of water when you're pregnant. And I was like, oh, so for me, thinking about all the water systems, I think about if you ever look, at the maps and the aerial views of what it looks like with all of the water systems going through in the rivers and the lakes and the ponds and the ocean, right? They look like veins. So for me, they're veins of Mother Earth, but water is literally the vehicle of creation. From creator to creator, because I'm a creator myself. She's right here, and she's so pretty. And I'm not biased at all. She's just the most beautiful kid in the world. And so I use the vehicle of creation to pray for her. I asked for her to come from the other side, and I did it with water. And when she came out, right, I grew her in my whole little, her whole little river from me to her, or more likely, well, more appropriately, her little puddle that she grew in. And so if you even think about it, we are made of water. Water sustains us. We have to continually renew our link to Mother Earth through water. Think about how we are renewed and what baptism is. So our baptism's a little bit different. When I think about that 1 minute that they told me that the best thing I could do was drink water for her, it's the direct link to creation. The vehicle of creation itself is water. And now I became, I started looking into what are all these water ceremonies everybody is doing, and what does that even mean? And I have this little person inside of me, and my chief Roger, he told me that if you ever look at the iterations of a fetus, right from the little molecules that first creator all the way up, grown in water, and she comes out in a little river, right? She comes out in these this tiny little wave, and that little wave is what makes her perfect, right? It baptizes her when she comes into this world. And if you think about one of our even most important ceremonies, if you look at the sweat lodge, what is it doing? Where are you going? You're going right back into Mother Earth, and you're letting all the water, the steam go over you and fill you again and make you perfect again. So the idea of her first baptism as being what I gave to her, the Nullahegan medicine person, he was the first one that told me about that, and I thought that was a beautiful story. And he always said that he was perfect because of it, and I always thought that was funny, but now I look at her and I'm like, oh, it's not so funny, it's real. Right? And how can you make yourself perfect over time and continuously? We can always recenter ourselves in our lives, and the way we do it is with water itself, with that whole vehicle of creation that links us to all other things. So for me, becoming a mom has totally changed my perspective. And it's made me it's made me a water protector in a way that I never understood before. And now I understand why in a lot of different indigenous groups, they use women are the ones that transport the water place to place and really make sure that the ceremony is continuing, right? And that it functions properly. And I did find a long time ago, I saved this poem and I thought it was beautiful. So I do want to, I'm going to read it for you because I think it plays into it. And this is by Christy Belcourt, and I believe she is a water protector. So she wrote this poem. Water has no flag, water knows no race. The earth's belly grew out of sun and moon and stars until her waters broke and all of creation took its first breath, crying out, glorious is life into the four directions. And for a million moons and a million cycles around the sun, she danced, birthing beings as miraculous as the stars, while the sun and moon danced like jewels on the surface of her seas, and all of creation sang in unison, glorious is life. For a million moons and a million cycles around the sun, all drank from the shores of her veins, all whose bones returned to her flesh, all who came from her, all here now, carrying within them all who ever was, and all who ever will be. Our mother, whose waters broke on that first day and made song possible. We sing now for you, to you, for you, drumming to your heartbeat, with nothing left to give but our bones and flesh as an offering, so that we too can drink in life from the shores of your veins for another million moons and another million cycles around the sun. I always like that. And it just so happened I was trying to find a different quote from to read to you, and that one popped up, and I was like, oh, that's lovely. So word, it's on. Okay. And
Hey, Mel,
yeah,
I just
go ahead.
wanted to mention too, was that, this is Don, is that because water is like breast milk to us, like it nourishes us, it feeds us, that most of our ancestors would put would do ceremonies near the springs that came out of the earth, Mother Earth. So I just want to let people know that part of our ancient history goes back to having those ceremonial sites near springs that came out of the earth, because that was the breast milk that sustained us and gave us life.
Nice. Yeah, thank you for that. That's good. And I've never heard of it in those terms, but that makes total sense to me. So okay. And one thing about me is that I grew up basically on the shore of the Missisquoi. So our house is, if you go down our driveway, it's right there. And the Missisquoi River was always really important to us. And as a citizen of El New, we've done canoe treks up through the Connecticut, and we spent a lot of time there. And that is one of the most significant waterways in our Wabanaki world. And so all of this is important. All of this water is important. All links to us. And I grew up on Lake Champlain Tabagak, doing a lot of fishing or hunting, because there's no fishing in our world. It's all hunting above or hunting below the water. So I also wanted to talk about my experience. I have about 10 minutes left, so I wanted to talk about my experience when I was doing my master's degree, and I wanted to recreate our worldview. And so at the time of contact, before anything changed, but when there were still records, and that was going to be my final graduate project. And I thought, oh my God, there was all these, a lot of our documents have been burned down in some of the churches that were burned or whatever. And there was some archival fires. So there's a lot of documents that aren't around anymore. And I thought, how am I going to do this? And one night, sitting with El New under the stars, and everyone was telling stories about Blue Scabi fighting back the ice monsters, all the way down to Azaban and the ramen noodles, which is clearly a new story. I realized I don't need any of those documents, because our whole history is right here. Just like, the whole history of our ancestors is right there in the womb, and the fetus goes everywhere from having a tail to when it falls off and you become a human being. And I gave her a face. So, and all of that through water. And so when I was beginning that project, I was like, I don't know how to do this. This is going to be the most ridiculous thing I've ever done, because I don't even know if it's possible. And someone came up to me at Johnson and they said, Mel, I'm going to give you something, and it is the key to understanding your world or our worldview. And if you can figure this out, then it'll kickstart you into doing what you need to do. I was like, oh boy, why do we speak in riddles? Can you just say what you mean? Like, maybe just explain it to me. Maybe we can have like some lectures sometime or something. And they actually gave me a concretion. And if you don't know what that is, you can look it up. But they're just little solidified pieces of like clay, hardened over time. And it was in the perfect shape of this little turtle. And I was like, wow, it's so beautiful. And so I still have it. It's still in my right in my underwear drawer because it's important. So I keep it with me all the time. But it kickstarted everything. And I was like, what the heck is a concretion? And then I heard about little people. And I was like, who are the little people? Right. And then I started asking questions. So the first people I went to at Missisquoi, I went to people like Brent Reeder. And I eventually went and I talked to people like, my chief, and I talked to Vera Sheehan and anybody I could ask questions about who were in the community that I knew a lot of things. And Brent told me this really great story about the little people and how his family used to basically use the little people as a way to like a babysitting tool. So if you don't come back before dark and you go too close to the river, the little people are going to pull you in and they're going to keep you there forever. And so I was like, the little people, right? Okay, this is fun. So then I went on, there's every time you hear an answer, there's 40 more questions that come up. And it all led me down to the banks of the river, and it led me to the water, and it led me to the little people. And, Roger tells stories of creation, and the first people that were created were out of stone, and how they had to basically crush them up because they had no hearts, and they turned out into the little people who play tricks on you, but they also make these little concretions to help guide you. So say it's going to be a really windy day, and it's going to be dangerous to go out on the water, you might find this concretion and it'll let you know, don't go out into the water. So it was, but also they live under the water. And so I was like, wait, I had to ask more questions. So what are the different worlds that we had? I had to totally reconfigure my entire worldview to understand people from the past. And honestly, I don't even know if I got any of it right, but I found all these great stories. And in the end, I put it together the way I understood it. So I'm not speaking for everybody, but it's just the way that I put together the information I had and the way I understood it. But it all led me to the water, and our whole worldview started there. And even our creation stories. Don told the story about Gluskabi, well, he wasn't the creator, he was the transformer, right? So as he rolled, and all the mountains formed and the valleys formed, and as all of those things happened, he also formed himself, and he grew legs and arms. Such as the way of creation, right? Anytime you're creating something new, you're also shaping yourself. And so that's really important. One of the things that I was reading about, one of my favorite storytellers is an Abenaki storyteller. His last name's Sanakwa. He's written quite a few books. But one of the things that I always thought was interesting, and I'll just read it. You can think about it yourself. I don't need to go through it, but he wrote in Legends in Stone, Bone, and Wood this little tiny piece called Reflections. And I think it all plays into this, right? Because understanding what the different worlds are, and that led me onto a new path and understanding how we thought about where do our spirits go? Do we have spirits? What lives under the water, right? So he wrote Reflections. I come from a water world, and in those lakes and rivers, everything was doubled. I saw the moose and the moose underneath, the tree and the tree underneath, the rainbows and the sunrise and the sunset, all above and below. It was as if I saw the physical being and then the spiritual being underneath, supporting it. There is the bear, and there is his double, the spirit of the bear. Technology tends to separate us from our shadows. So one of the things I remember reading about were these interesting pieces that people were buried with in terms of boat stones, and nobody knows what they are or what they did. For me, I like to think of someone once said that, well, once told me that when you are born and when you die, you come in and out of the same spiral of life, all through Pleiades, right? And I like to think that when she did that, that she met some of our family members on the way, that she got to meet, you know, my grandfather or my brother or whatever. But I think about those little pieces in the shape of boats. And I'm thinking, well, if you can see all that is underneath and above the water, and the water is just a reflection of this world and ourselves, what better way to get from one world to the next than to go through that way and traveling on a boat? So for me, I kind of think about her journey and how she got here and where she comes from, and me choosing her and why she stays and wants to be here with us in this world. So one of the things that I learned in researching all of this worldview information and pulling together as many stories as I could, and I definitely don't have enough time to go over the whole thing, because I think I've done at least an 8-hour lecture on that. But one of the basic premises of our worldview is that all things are part of creation are also people. So a human being is one form of a person. My dog is a person. The bear outside that often visits here and freaks me right the heck out is a person. And I like to remember she's a mother too. And so just be careful because moms are pretty protective. So anyway, they're all people. And if you're a person, it has to go beyond just that. It's not this simplistic view that all things are people, but or all things are animate. If they're all people, they also have to have a will, and they have to have thoughts. And just because things don't think the same way as you, or that you can't hear them when they speak and you don't understand their words, doesn't mean they aren't speaking or that they aren't thinking. So it does go beyond this simplistic view of animism. And in the end, the way I think I can best describe it is if everything is a person, everything down when I first had her, I made sure her dad brought her outside and he introduced her to the earth, because that was the first person I really wanted her to know, because she was the one that gave her to us. I prayed to her first. I introduced her to the corn stalks because it was February and there's not much left, but we went through Corn Mother and I thanked her. We introduced her to the wind and to the sky and to all things and the directions. And I brought her down to the water and we had a little ceremony, and she knows where she comes from and creation knows her now. They know her name, and they brought her here. So I'm hoping they'll protect her as she goes through all of her life. But here's the thing. I don't know if anyone's ever watched Moana, but it's one of my favorite movies. And there's a part where she says, "It's okay. The ocean is a friend of mine." The Connecticut River, the Missisquoi River, the Tabagak, all of those veins of Mother Earth, all of those holding the vehicle of creation, the blood of Mother Earth, all of those things, they're all people. And so they're at the very heart of all of this. I'd like for people to, you don't have to believe what we believe because this isn't your culture, right? And unless you're Abenaki, that's great. But I'm just sharing our worldview because that's the real value in diversity, right? If I can see beauty in something where the dominant culture can't. There's something to be said for change. That maybe you can look through my eyes a little bit and you can see beauty, and that's why diversity is important, because we can always understand a new way of being, and we can make the world better. And I truly believe that if people saw through our eyes, even for a day, that the world would be a drastically different place, and that we could love more things, and that what would it look like if you knew that everything was a person? What would it look like if you knew that when you went into the Connecticut, that there were people everywhere in it? Maybe there were some little people, right? So don't take too many fish because they might pull you under the water, and you have to live there with them. But just think about that. Think about the Connecticut. Think about the Siskoy. Think about all of those waters that you know. They're water. They're a being, and they choose to be what they are. So in our language, it's a whole world of animacy where everything is alive. So think of it that way. Think of it as, why did Don say it was full of memory? The only way it can be full of memory is if it's a person too. So maybe think of the Connecticut as a friend of yours, and see how that changes your world. Because I know that when I introduce her to everything, I always talk to her about, this is your friend, this is the wind. And I have a toad that I like to talk to, and he sits out on my back porch all the time. And my person's always like, "Oh, are you talking to your toad friend? Or are you talking to me?" I'm like, "Just my toad friend. It's okay," because he's always sitting on the back porch. So I've got to introduce her to her toad friend. But I have a lot of friends, and I think that is the ultimate value. And seeing through my ancestors' eyes, they opened it up, and it became a world of lots of magic and beauty, because I can see magic in all the little things in the world now, and the beauty of a flower and it looking back at me, or walking out into the woods, or canoeing on the water. And now I have all these friends, right? I see all these people walking around, that don't realize that they are a part of creation, that we're all parts of creation, and that we'd like to welcome all of you back to the circle of creation, because then maybe everyone would stop messing up the world like they are. So come back, and we'll talk about all of our new friends together. So I'm going to end there, and I hope you got something out of this. We're going to look at some of the questions, but thank you so much for being here with us tonight. I appreciate you and all of my new online friends. Okay, so we're gonna do some questions. So we're gonna read through some of these. And first, Roberta Allen, thank you. Your visual and audio are great. We appreciate it. We're glad that you can hear us and us, because we're so pretty. And my daughter, she's super pretty.
All right. So people want to know how Abenaki is related to Wabanaki. So the easiest way is Abenaki is people of the dawn, or people of the dawnland. So and Wabanaki means people of the first light. So it's basically the same thing. The difference is that it's just a different a different word, one meaning dawn, one meaning first light, which is the same thing, but just a little twist. It's like when someone says, ole oni means thank you, and somebody else says williwani. It's the same thing, but it's just said in a different way. So we look at Wabanaki as encompassing everybody who sees the first light of day, and Abenaki is it's more closely related to us. We are the people of the first dawn. So I don't know if that explains it, because the Penobscots are the Eastern Abenaki and we're the Western Abenaki. So it comes up and it goes from the east to the west. So I'm hoping that answers the question. Mel, maybe you have more to say on that.
So basically, the way I always explain it is Wabanaki encompasses all the people who see if you look at a map, and you'll see the sun rising, where the coast were all the first people to see the light of dawn. And so that includes the eastern and western Abenaki, and the eastern are obviously the Penobscots, Passamaquoddies, Micmac, and Maliseet. And then there's the western Abenakis. And remember, language matters and the words that you say matter. And so Abenaki is not actually our name, right? We talked about, Don talked about that, and people identifying with villages and people identifying as Alnoba, which is the people, because we aren't our own mascots. So
Yeah, and just to kind of follow up on that, we are place-based people as well as canoe people. Is like Nulhegan is the place of the wooden trap. So Nulhegan Band of Coosac Abenaki Nation would be known to others as we're the people of the wooden fish traps who live in the pines, who see the first light of day. So that's how other Native people would see us. Or Missisquoi would be the place of the flint, or the place of where the flint is. So it is a descriptive language, and we are part of that land. The land is part of us. We're part of that place. So anyway, that's the way it kind of is. It's hard to explain other than that.
Yeah, that's good.
And as for years, Donald Shapiro had mentioned that what years are we speaking of? With us, there's really no time and space. Things are what they are and when they're meant to be. We're talking historically, like if you're talking about the Jesuit missions or stuff like that, obviously the 1700s, you're talking about those kind of things when the French came over and called this place theirs and set up missions. So you have to understand, we didn't have the concept of land ownership, or no one could own water or could own air, but people found ways to bottle air, bottle water, and own land. So we never thought of this as like Vermont, or we didn't think of this place as New England or New France or any of those things. We thought of these, this is our home, this is our place, and there is really no time and space. It has always been our home, and we were always stewards of that, and we will be into the future. So we're just here during this time and place and this space, and then we transition to the spirit world, but we're still all around. So we don't really, it's just it's hard to explain unless you know our culture.
And there's another question from Anne Marie. I believe that I heard Chief Don and David Brule use what seems like a greeting of Kwe Kwe. How wide is this greeting? I also believe I may have heard First Nations peoples in Ontario using it. Yes. So the way that we understand it, and I think this is this history is good. So, but if other people have more to add on this, then awesome, and we're always happy to learn new things. But Kwe Kwe, there are different variations on this, depending on which group. But anybody who was allied in the there was a confederacy that predated any Europeans coming, and it was quite widespread. And so anybody that was a part of that, it's basically a greeting that lets us know that we're all part of that. And as far as I know, Ontario, it goes much farther into the west. That we have quite a few people that were that used Kwe Kwe. And so I actually watched what is that movie? The Wampanoag language movie, the Reclamation Project. It was excellent. We still live here, and they talk about saying Kwe Kwe. That's because they were allied with us. So yes, and also if you go into the woods and you see someone, they say Segon, you know that they are not part of this, and you should be worried. So at least that was in the past. So that's from what I understand. that is kwe kwe, and I've heard other people say kui kui or kwe, just do a kwe. It depends on where you are, but it's the basic reading of all people that were in this in this.
And the great thing about that word is that it is universal, and every native tribe that, at least in New England, uses the same word but spelled differently. Like it may be Kwai or Kway here, but the Wolastoqs up in New Brunswick spell it Qey, but it still is pronounced the same way, and it means greetings. It means the same thing. So it's kind of awesome because it's so universal. It's the first thing you do is you greet someone out of respect. I also see a message above by Andy Grant. Andy Grant asked that they've heard different pronunciations of Abenaki. You may hear Abenaki or Abenaki, and what the determination is Abenaki is more of a French inflection. Abenaki is more of an English translation. And the way that is being used now is that when someone says I'm Abenaki or Abenaki or something like that, you will know that they're more from the Canadian side, Odanak, Willanak. And if somebody says Abenaki, that's more from below the Canadian line. And that's really kind of how we distinguish each other. I mean, it means the same exact thing. It's just, it's like different dialects. It's different inflections based on where you live.
Mm-hmm. And I will take the other question that Emery has. Are all springs sacred or some more than others? Well, the question is, what do you consider sacred? Because I think that something is only sacred if people have a relationship to it and you create those relationships. So I don't have to think something is sacred, but in our worldview, everything that's part of creation is a person, and therefore the way you walk through life is ceremony of itself if you do it with a good heart. So if you look at things with a good heart, if you come looking at everything as being people, as being parts of creation, everything can be sacred, and you treat it with respect. But for some people, I mean, maybe the muffin that I ate was not very sacred, although it was pretty darn good. So I would, but anyway, I'm just saying, it depends. What do you, here's the other thing. In order for something to be sacred, it needs to remain sacred. So you have to continue your relationship with it. So when we look at going to, say, Bellows Falls and the petroglyphs, our tribe in El Nu, we go there often and at least once a year, and we sing to them. And we maintain our relationship to it. So it maintains the sacrality of the place. So I leave you with a question to answer your question. What do you consider as sacred?
Yeah, and also from my point of view, everything is to be respected, but not everything may be sacred, right? And like Mel was saying, it's your definition. And we have these discussions a lot with anthropologists and different people, where some people says everything is sacred and some people say what is sacred. And I think for us is sacred is a level of importance of respect. So like if you are going to a burial site with burial objects or places that are really more holier than others in our spiritual world, it is more sacred. If it is, say, like our ancestors, like an anthropologist digs up the ground and finds a trash pile that our ancestors looked at it as a trash pile, where they might have thrown a fire. There was a fire pit that might have they thrown a bunch of bones and other things. It was their trash heap. That wasn't sacred to them, so why should it be sacred to us? It was more, it's respected. You need to respect it because it was theirs. It wasn't yours, and it's something that you need to study, but it may not be sacred, right? So that this is where we have a big issue with sacredness. Abenaki and Native people want to be looked at as human, right? Like if I use this for like anthropologists, they may dig up a burial and they just start taking artifacts from it and say, wow, look at that. Isn't that kind of neat? Look what I found. But I asked the same thing, like if you go to someone's cemetery and you dig up somebody's grandmother and take a ring off their finger because it was with them, is that cool? You'd see people freaking out and picketing. But if somebody digs up or finds something in a native burial and they think it's an artifact, it's so you have to look at the sacredness of and the level of it. I don't know if that helps, but like Mel says, everybody has a different interpretation of what sacred is. That's why we run into a lot of trouble because anyway.
Well, it's individual too. So
yeah,
what you might find sacred is not what I find sacred.
Right.
Yeah. There's another question here. Oh, and I wanted to just mention Brian Blanchett messaged me and he said, Kwai Kwai is for all Algonquin people. It means I recognize you. So I wanted to make sure that his information got in there too. So, and then there's a message here for Melody. Thank you so much for inviting us. Yes, you're welcome. I'm an older woman who lives right by a beautiful creek. Can you tell me if there's anything special you would recommend I do to thank the water behind my house? Like I said, ceremonies, life itself. I think, I forget who wrote that book. Oh my God, who wrote that book? Don, do you remember?
What's that again?
Ceremony is Life Itself. There's a gentleman who wrote the book and it was,
I'm not sure.
Anyway, he's kind of awesome, but I'll try, hopefully I'll remember it. Anyway, so what to do to thank the water? What do you want to do to thank the water? I realize I'm answering all these questions with questions, but what is the best way for you to be able to express it so that you feel that the water is heard? What can you give of yourself to it? So, you know what? I like to sing. I am not the best singer, and my daughter, I will tell you, sometimes she cries more when I sing, so I think that's a message. But she really likes when Brian sings. So anyway, I'd say maybe do a song. If you like to sing, do a song, or, you know, we give a little tobacco or whatever it is. But whatever your tradition is, that's what I would say. Give whatever you want to of yourself.
It's more about showing respect to it.
Yeah.
And bonding with it. There was also a question to Brian about, they said that Brian, they didn't catch what the first song was, but he used a rattle. And what's that about? Could you please talk about why the rattle, and is it an old song? I can, until Brian responds, I can tell you that rattles to us represented the horned serpent, which is a rattle, and we men were rattlers as well, and it just is part of our culture, and it keeps you grounded. Like songs lift your prayers to the heaven, and rattles would keep you grounded. That's why we gave rattles to our children when they were born, so that way when they went to the dream world, they would come back to their body and stay grounded. That kind of tells you, a lot of Europeans don't realize why they give their children's rattles in their bed, or why they gave them rattles. That's an old native tradition to make sure their spirit comes back to where they began in their body and stays with them. That's why we give rattles to our children. Anyway, Brian, are you there? Can you answer more about the song and the rattle?
An old greeting song. The rattle, I mean, well, I've been working on this new room and I couldn't find the beater for one of my drums, so the rattle was a great choice. But I mean, we used all different types of percussive instruments for different things, but rattles definitely meant more for ceremonies. I mean, I got to watch Medewin sing to a medicine man down in Massachusetts years ago that was in the hospital, and that's his instrument of choice. So yeah, I normally sing on my powwow drum, and I have my hand drums, but I just thought that the rattle would be a better fit for what's going on here. No real spiritual meaning for this performance, but they do say not to mix. Rattle brings very powerful energy, and so does the drum. So teachings are that if you use the two together, you can really bring out some powerful energy. So that's my take on drums and the rattle. Everybody there?
Yep,
No.
great. Thanks, Brian. And Roberta Allen asked, who and how is a chief chosen? Well, I'm a chief myself, and depends on the tribe. Like traditionally, the council of elders or the family people who made up the council would pick someone to do a task that they were good at until they were no longer needed, and then those people would come back into the community. So in our case, I was chosen by the council to be chief, and those council members represented their citizens, their family. So I was actually elected, and I will be in that position until I cannot do it anymore and I step down, or if the council feels that I'm no longer able to do that that job, and then they will pick somebody else. That's the same with a war chief. If there's a conflict, they might elect someone to lead warriors, and then when the battles are done, they will come back into the fold. That is the traditional way of picking chiefs. Actually, it even goes further in the Wabanaki Confederacy. Actually, the Wabanaki tribes would actually elect some chiefs for another tribe, so they would stay in good relations with each other way back when. But there are some tribes that Missisquoi was one that did a hereditary, it went from father to daughter to, but the way we look at it, if you have to have the support of your people, or you won't be able to be effective. So most chiefs are elected.
And thank you, CW. It's Gitsi Tanamuk. I couldn't remember the name of Ceremony is Life Itself. That's who it is.
Okay.
So thank you. And I do know, I believe he did a TEDx talk or a TED talk, and that was super good. And then Chris Jocelyn wants to know if there are any books you can recommend. There are a lot of great books. And I think one of my favorite books of all time is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. She's a superstar, and the way that she writes, it just makes your heart happy, even about difficult topics and how we can bring people together. I think it's great. And some of my favorite books to read from Abenaki authors, I really love reading Sanakwa's books. He wrote Seven Eyes, Seven Legs, and Welcome to the Caribou Man, and Legends in Stone, Bone, and Wood. So those are some of my favorite. And Ruth Holmes Whitehead's Stories from the Six Worlds. It's really pretty. Those are Mi'kmaq stories, but I love them. They're great. Anyway, Don, do you have any suggestions for books?
Well, no, I kind of look more at the other stuff, like the Wampum Laws books, the some of those more ancient cultural story, Gluskapi stories, those kind of things. But yes, I think we have authors. We have Brian Chenevert, who wrote As a Band, which is for kids. We have many authors. Joseph Bruchak, that's Nulhegan, that writes a lot of books. He's got like 136 books. I mean, I would say, what's the Tales of the Red Man? I think that was done by a Penobscot person.
Oh God.
Years and years ago.
I only had 4 hours of sleep from this kid, so I don't. Sapio Selmo, wasn't he one that wrote? I want to say he did some of the wampum stuff.
Yeah. But I mean, there's a lot of books out there, but anyway, so hopefully that helps. Roberta Allen also said, what were the homes like in the 1800s? Were they longhouses? We did have wigwams, and we did it was different. See, in the wintertime, we would have more permanent structures because there would be multiple families going into the pines to live, and they would be more of a longhouse type structure where multiple families could live. And also there would be wigwam kind of structures, but most of them were more solid. When we went to the floodplains to live for the summer, you're there for a few months, so then you would you would build more of the wigwam type structures. But then there was a thing that most people don't know about are called junkets. Those were things that hunting parties would use, and there would be like a week, no more than a week structure. It'd almost be like a lean-to, but it had a long ridge pole in the bottom, and then you would put all your gear in the back, and then you would be in front where the fire was, so that way your head and your front are protected. So those were pretty much the structures that we had. I don't know where you are, Mel, but I'm on when the chats are 8:29, and I'm just going down the row.
Okay. And it's Nicolar. Nicolar is the one who did lifetimes.
Joseph Nicolar.
Yeah, and Brian mentioned Lisa Brooks as a good author. She's Abenaki. So. Okay.
And there was a quick question on how is the forest of the Don land before contact? How has that changed? I mean, how hasn't it changed, right? I mean, like we didn't look at ownership. We looked at it as stewardship. So we made sure that if we took care of the land took care of us. So even though that to Europeans it looked like people might have abandoned things, those places were groomed and made so that the habitat was there for the animals. And you know, once we weren't able to be stewards of the land, we see what has happened. I just wish people, now that this COVID thing is happening, more people would be out connecting to the land and the earth, and they would not look at it as dominion over, but as peers and partners with it, like stewards. So I think that really is the way, the concept. You have to look at it differently and not be a dominion over something, but be more stewards of. I think that's really important.
And I also wanted to push back a little too on this question, because a lot of people have this perception that when Europeans of different nations came in different areas, when they walked onto the shores, it was just this giant forest. When people met us, we were agriculturalists, and we were a sophisticated group of people. I mean, when you looked at people who were in Massachusetts Bay Area, those were also agriculturalists. So in terms of levels of sophistication, we were not just groups of people that were hanging out in the woods. We had cleared farmland that we were using to grow our Seven Sisters, right? We had the types of crops and the way that we grew things. Those are fields you fight and die for, as Fred always says. And I just want to mention that. So while there's forests here and we took care of things and made sure that there was paths so that, you know, if you clear things out a little bit in there and you're a good steward, that lots of different animals can survive in those places. But also you need to have farmland. So I just need to put it out there.
And I just want to also throw in too is that the word stewardship really means something in our culture. And I think that people always saying we got to protect Mother Earth, which is true, but we got to be stewards of Mother Earth, because Mother Earth was here before we came, and will be here after we leave. So Mother Earth is correcting herself because of our deeds and our misdeeds. And whether we survive that correction is to be seen. So that's why the saying is, what we do to the earth, we do to ourselves. So she will be here long after us. And I use the example of Chernobyl. I mean, they had a nuclear meltdown in Chernobyl. Guess who's the only thing not there? I mean, the plants and forests are reclaiming the city. There's animals there. Be it that they are, you know, they're radiated and there's problems, but they're there, but we are not. So things come and go, but Mother Earth stays forever. So we have to really think about that and look at that stewardship for our own protection and for our own well-being for our grandkids. Because if not, we may not survive that course correction. So that's a really important thing people should know.
And so we also got a question that was emailed that they want us to address. So They said, I am drawn to offer corn to the earth as part of greeting the day and giving thanks for life each day. This is something I learned from an Indigenous teacher. Is this cultural appropriation? Well, I think if you had not been given that teaching from an Indigenous person as a gift, then yeah, it would be cultural appropriation. But if someone gave that to you to do, and if that's something that makes your heart happy and you're doing it with a good heart, then no. If you want to offer corn, we do not own the monopoly on corn. So I don't know, Don, what do you think?
Well, I think the way I look at things, and people want to know about the what's cultural appropriation, and for me is the only thing that is ours is our culture, our traditions, and our language. I mean, that is ours. The circle of life and prayers to the Creator, that is not ours to. That is not ours per se. It is how we practice our culture to connect to the Creator and connect to the earth. People can do it any way they want. We have a certain way that we do it based on cultural traditions. So, but the web of life, the Creator, Mother Earth, that's universal. And how you connect to that and how you offer blessings to that is your will or your choice, not ours. So that's the way I look at things. Like, we were given tobacco to offer for prayers, because that was all the human beings, right? That was the mother. The mother couldn't feed her children, so she was given something to give. So for me, is if you were doing something in a good way and a good blessing, then however you connect to give something in order to get something in return. Just but if you're doing exactly what our culture is and you're not that culture, that's when you start leaning into misappropriation, as saying it's something that is yours and not somebody else's. If it is somebody else's, like Mel said, if you don't have permission to do a certain thing, a certain ceremony or a certain way, then you should find your own way and your own way to doing it and your own way of making it your own.
And this works too, like group to group. So like there's powwow culture, which is, pan-Indian, and there's a lot of really great stuff that comes out of that. And it's across the tribes. However, if there is a particular ceremony that Lakota people are doing, and I've never been included in those ceremonies, I cannot use those ceremonies just because, we might be Indigenous people. We are not those Indigenous people. So we need to be careful and be respectful of each other as much as other people need to be respectful of us. And, like I'm not going to go to the Sami people and be like, oh, I really like this. This makes sense, and start doing it. So just, people use common sense, and if you're given this as a gift, I think it's a nice way to honor things. So if you read, I can't even think. I need more sleep. But David Geo, he talked about how there is no wrong way to pray, because it's a beautiful thing for people to know who they are, and just people to give respect. There's so much hate and everything in this world, and wouldn't it be nice if everybody gave a little more respect to things? So there's no wrong way to pray.
Right. But what is respectful, though, is that if somebody gives you permission to do something, you should at least acknowledge that it was given to you for that reason. For instance, we do not wear big war bonnets here in the East, right? That was a Plains Indian type of thing. We didn't wear those types of headdresses. We wore moose hair, or we wore peaked caps, or we wore other types of things, but we never wore the big chief headdresses as you would see in a stereotypical picture. Those were people of the Plains. Now, Homer wore one because he was gifted one by a person from the West and said, "You are chief, we want you to wear this because you're honoring us by wearing it." So he did. So it was, but he also would say, "This was given to me by this person and asked me to wear that." So he was identifying that it wasn't from our place, but it was being asked. He was doing it out of respect. So those are the kind of things. If you're doing a ceremony that somebody else's, just say, well, this is a ceremony that was given to me by these people, or this person who gave me that permission to do it. So then you're honoring the person who said you could do it, if that helps. I don't know if there's any more questions.
I think we're at time. So
Okay,
Yep.
we are.
Yep. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here with us. We so appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, as well. I'm Don, and thank you very much. And I'm not sure if David has some parting words from Nolan Bika.
I'm unmuting myself. Yes. Yeah, I do have a few words, but not a whole lot. I'm just in awe of what has just happened here. I'm very moved to have had Chief Don Stevens and Melody and Brian in my living room, and I'm sure you all are feeling the same way. It's an incredible experience, and that's all I can do is to offer just tremendous thanks to the three participants. I know what it means to have spent some time rehearsing and have spent some time getting ready and preparing, and it's just been a wonderful experience. We have to thank Lisa McLaughlin, who behind the scenes has been our tech coordinator engineer there, and thanks to little Mali and all of the other people, including Diane Dix, who is our events organizer and who has pulled a lot of this together. So at the risk of saying too much, I just want to thank all of those who continued to ask questions. The question and answer session was just incredibly informative, as were the various presentations by our guests. And I really want to thank you all. We hopefully will see Chief Don Stevens and Melody again. Definitely Brian Blanchette. Whenever we can, we make sure Brian comes to participate in our events, the Pocumtuck Homelands Festival. Don Stevens has been there all the time, and Melody has been at our Discovery Center presentations. I'd said I wouldn't talk too much, but there's one thing that years ago when Melody came to the Discovery Center, and there were so many things that she said that moved me. But one thing, when we were talking about creatures that are not human, she mentioned, you call the bear, and you call the dog and cat, but what do you think that they call you? And I've spent my whole life out in the woods and with dogs and animals, and it just struck me. I said, yeah, when that cardinal comes to my yard, or when that raccoon goes through the yard, what is he calling me? I hope it's a good name. And I'm sure that people who are not so good to them, that they have a name for those people too. But keep that in mind. That was one of the things that I just loved and I retained from what Melody told us years ago. So anyway, thank you all from the Nolan Bika Project. And we hope that we will be able to see you in person one of these events. We have a whole lineup yet, and right on down through October down at the mouth of the river. But we've had to reschedule a lot. So keep an eye on our website and our Facebook. And thank you all again. Thank for our presenters, and everyone have a good, safe night. Thank you very much. Bye now.
This is a new song. It's called Waterfall. It's about reclaiming my childhood. The chorus is in Abenaki. heading to this waterfall, place I went to when I was young, living just for fun. Trying to find this child inside, take away whatever made him want to hide. Come to the light of day, my friend. This is where the darkness it ends. Now by seas I know me. Running forever and I don't know why. Running for something I can't find. Maybe it's all in my mind. Lead me down by seas I know me. Seaweed, yeah. Running forever and I don't know why. Running for something I can't find. Maybe it's all in my mind. Down by seas I know me. Down by seaweed, yeah. Thanks, everybody. I'll now seas, little Indian, little Indian. Hello, me, little Indian inside of me. Thank you.